going to test this. Let's give it a moment. I want it to go live. I'm not in character yet. Here we go. Mute. No, I don't want to mute. I just want to turn off the commercial. Lucky me. I get my commercials on my own stream. Woohoo! I gotta test the sound though. Okay. Sounds like the sound is right on, which is great. So, let me close this and get going on this. All right. So, I am not going to do a really annoying witchy voice to go along with my look today, because I really don't think that it's soothing. And if we want to watch this stuff for the soothing aspect of lore, then this is not really a soothing kind of thing. So what we're going to do is, for Witches Festival, I am obviously going to be a witch. And I'm going to read you the more spooky stories by the fire in grahtwood while we sit here and listen and warm up. We're going to listen to some creepy lore. Now, I picked the scariest ones I could from Daggerfall, which is the book series we're currently reading. And then we're going to move on to another game series after this, probably Redguard or something like that. But we're going to go with Daggerfall, and we're going to be a witch. So let's start reading with the most boring one first. Now, I'm going to skip over legal basics because they are literally like, this is what it is. For example, murder, any act of premeditated or malicious, or premeditated and malicious, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it'd be like reading the back of some sort of, I don't know. I've read laws and they're not fun. So we're going to skip over that one and go right over to Wabbajack. Little boys shouldn't summon up the forces of eternal darkness unless they have an adult supervising. I know, but on that sunny night on the 5th, the first seed, I didn't want an adult. I wanted Hermaeus Mora, the Daedra of knowledge, learning, guns, and varnishes. You see, I was told by a beautiful, large-breasted man who lived under the library in my hometown that the 5th, the first seed, was Hermaeus Mora's night. And if I wanted the Agma Infinium, the Book of Knowledge, I had to summon him. When you're the new King of Solitude, every bit of knowledge helps. Normally, you need a witch's coven, or a mage's guild, or at least matching pillowcase and sheets to invoke a Prince of Oblivion. The man under the library showed me how to do it myself. He told me to wait until the storm was at its height before shaving the cat. I've forgotten the rest of the ceremony, it doesn't matter. Someone appeared who I thought was Hermaeus Mora. The only thing that made me somewhat suspicious was Hermaeus Mora, from what I read, was a big, blobby, multi-eyed, clawed monstrosity, and this guy looked like a waistcoated banker. Also, he kept calling himself Sheogorath, not Hermaeus Mora. Still, I was so happy to have successfully summoned Hermaeus Mora, these inconsistencies did not bother me. He had me do some things that didn't make any sense to me, beyond the mortal scope, breadth, and ken, I suppose. And then his servant happily gave me something he called the Wabbajack. Wabbajack, 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 Wabbajack. Maybe the Wabbajack is the Book of Knowledge. Maybe I'm smarter because I know cats can be bats, can be rats, can be hats, can be gnats, can be that's, can be thises. And the doors can be bores, and snores can be floors, can be wars, can be spores, can be yours, can be mine. I must be smart, for the interconnective system is very clear to me. Then why or wherefore do people keep calling me mad? Wabba-jack, wabba-jack, wabba-jack. Madness is spooky. I'm telling you. Uncle Sheo. Yes, he summoned the wrong person. Or the right person, depending. Let's do a little bit of boring lore, but it does have something to do with, we are going through all of the lore, first of all, so there's that. But it's also got something to do with some spooky elements, the Daedra. All right, starting from here. On Oblivion by Maurian Zenas, a guide to Oblivion and the Daedra. Note, the author continued to research Oblivion after writing this book, as documented in a book written by his apprentice, The Doors of Oblivion. It is improper, however customary, to refer to the denizens of the dimension of Oblivion as, quote, demons. This practice probably dates to the Alessian doctrines of the First Era prophet Maruk, which rather amusingly forbade traffic with daemons and then neglected to explain what daemons were. It is most probable that, quote, daemon is a misspelling or etymological rendition of Daedra, the old elven word for those strange, powerful creatures of uncertain motivation who hail from the dimension of Oblivion. Daedra is actually the plural form. The singular is Daedroth. In a later tract by King Hael the Pious of Skyrim, almost 1,000 years after the publication of the original doctrines, the evil machinations of his political enemies are compared to, quote, the wickedness of the demons of Oblivion. Their depravity equals that of Sanguine itself. If they are cruel as Boethia, calculating as Molag and mad as Sheogorath. Hael the Pious thus long-windedly introduced 4 of the Daedra lords to written record. But the written record is not, after all, the best way to research Oblivion and the Daedra who inhabit it. Those who traffic with daemons seldom wish it to become a matter of public account. Nevertheless, scattered throughout the literature of the First Era are diaries, journals, notices for witch burnings, and guides for Daedra slayers. These I have used as my primary source material. They're at least as trustworthy as the Daedra lords I have summoned and spoken with at length. Apparently, Oblivion is a place composed of many lands. Thus, the many names for which Oblivion is synonymous, Cold Harbor, Quagmire, Moonshadow, etc., it may be correctly supposed that each land of Oblivion is ruled over by one prince. The Daedra princes, whose name appear over and over in ancient records, though this is not an infallible test of their authenticity or explicit existence, I can't speak today, to be sure, are the aforementioned Sanguine, Boethia, Molag and Sheogorath, and in addition, Azura, Mafala, Clavicus Vile, Vermina, Malakath, Hermaeus, Laura, Namira, Jigalag, Nocturnal, Maroon's Dagon, and Periite. From my experience, Daedra are a very mixed lot. It is almost impossible to categorize them as a whole, except for their immense power and penchant for extremism. Be that as it may, I have attempted to do so, in a few cases, purely for the sake of scholastic expediency. Maroon's Dagon, Molag Periite, Boethia, and Vermina are among the most consistently demonic of the Daedra, in the sense that their spears seem to be destructive in nature. The other Daedra can, of course, be equally dangerous, but seldom purely for the sake of destruction as these 5 can. Nor are these previous 5 identical in their destructiveness. Maroon's Dagon seems to prefer natural disasters, earthquakes, and volcanoes for venting his anger. Molag elects the employment of other Daedra, and Boethia inspires the arms of mortal warriors. Periite's spear seems to be pestilence, and Vermina's torture. In preparation for the next installment in this series, I will be investigating two matters that have intrigued me since I began my career as a Daedra researcher. The first one is on one particular Daedra, perhaps another Daedra prince, referred to in multiple articles of Incunabula of Hircine. Hircine has been called the huntsman of the princes and the father of man beasts, but I have yet to find anyone who can summon him. The other, and perhaps more doubtful goal I have, is to find a practical means for mortal men to pass through to oblivion. It has always been my philosophy that we need only fear that which we do not understand, and with that thought in mind, I ever pursue my objective. Some of these books are a little bit dry, I gotta warn you, but at least the stories can be enjoyed. I'm sure all of us really want to actually go through all of this stuff anyway, so at least this way you can just listen to it instead of having to read it yourself. Sort of like books on witch tape. The Pig Children by Tyson Bain discusses the history of the Orcish threat in the Iliac Bay. No one, not the oldest dark elf of Mount Dagoth Ur, or the ancient sage of solitude himself, can recall a time when the orc did not ravage our fair Tamriel. Whatever foul and pestilent Daedra of Oblivion conjured them up could scarcely have created a more constant threat to the well-being of the civilized races of Tamriel than the obnoxious orc. Orcs are thankfully easy to recognize from the other humanoids by their size, commonly 40 pertans in height and 15,000 angades in weight. Their brutal pig-like features and their stench. They are consistently belligerent, morally grotesque, intellectually moronic, and unclean. By all rights, the civilized races of Tamriel should have been able to purge the land of their blight eras ago, but their ferocity, animal cunning, and curious tribal loyalty have made them inevitable as leeches in a stagnant pool. Tales of orcish barbarity precede written record. When Jastiaga wrote of the Order of Diagonus joining armies of Daggerfall and Sentinel to hold at bay the wicked orcs in their foul Orsinian fastness, and burn aught in cleansing flame in First Era 950, she assumed that any reader would be aware of the savagery of the orcs. When the siege was completed 30 years later, after the death of many heroes, including Gaiden Shinji, and the destruction of Orsinium scattered the orcish survivors throughout the Rothgarian mountains, she further wrote, "The free peoples rejoiced for that their ancient enemy was dispersed into diverse parts." Obviously, the orcs have been terrorizing the region of Iliac Bay since the early years of the First Era. The Pig Children, that's not very nice. Then again, I'm a witch. You do that. You can just listen in. I'm not doing voices today. I'm just going to read soothingly compared to the way I did last time, because I'm a witch. And I don't want to do any evil cackle voice. Although I could, I won't. Okay. The next one is Vampires of the Iliac Bay, Chapter 1. Chapter 1 of a story of a man's journey into vampirism. There are over 100 distinct kinds of vampire in Tamriel. The Iliac Bay region alone has 9 variations with unique powers and abilities. I have this information not only because I've been researching this blight of the world for the last 10 years of my life, but because for the last 7 years before that, I was one of the creatures. Vampirism is a disease like brain rot or cholera, but far, far more insidious. One can become a vampire through certain magical items or by the curse of a powerful wizard, but the most common cause is the bite or scratch of a vampire. There are no symptoms of vampirism except this: if the victim sleeps after the attack, but before he becomes a vampire, his sleep will be plagued with nightmares. During this 2 to 4 day period, when the disease has been spread, but the victim is still mortal, most any temple healer can remove the curse of vampirism. There will be no further warning. I do not remember dying. I had been a scout for an order of knights, which shall go nameless for this. A daughter of a local nobleman had been kidnapped by a mysterious character, and my captain had located his hideout. Deep in the dank underground chambers, I searched until I found the girl, or what remained of her, a corpse the color of snow, drained of every drop of blood. I knew what the mystery man was right then, but he found me before I found the exit out. Took a good-sized hunk out of my fighting arm before I managed to outrun him. I figured I was lucky to be alive. Some luck. My trip back to the knightly order was a 5-day journey. I decided to get some rest early to get my arm in better shape in case I found any more trouble. I can't remember the dreams I had that night, only that I was doing something horrible and couldn't stop myself. I woke up screaming. The next night, at an inn a little closer to my destination, my sleep was deep and dreamless. On the third night, I died. Of course, I didn't know that I died. I had gone to sleep in a nice warm feathered bed, and I awoke on the cold, wet stone mortuary slab. Dazed, I opened the door to the mausoleum I was in, which I think I must have been locked. I was in a cemetery not far from a town I knew, so I wandered in. It was late at night, so there were precious few souls in the streets. I paused to read a public notice and noticed the date. The date was 2 weeks later than I thought it must have been. As I puzzled over that, I saw a girl, a wench at my favorite tavern in that town, wandering towards me. I hailed her. She ignored me. I called her by her name. She turned to me smiling, but with an expression that told me she did not know who I was. I had visited her tavern on my way over to the mystery man's hideout, but she didn't know me. I told her my name. She angrily told me that it was a very poor joke, and that I looked nothing like the brave knight who used to visit the town, and that if I didn't know, he was dead. My emotions were a tangled skein. I could tell she was not joking, that I looked nothing like myself. I was touched by her sorrow at my death and horrified by the idea dawning on me of what I had become. Suddenly, an overriding instinct overcame all my thoughts: hunger. Without even thinking about what I was doing, I reached out and tore her throat open. I drained her until she looked like the corpse in the mystery man's dungeon. That was part 1, and now we move on to part 2. Chapter 2 of A Story of a Man's Journey into Vampirism. I told in the first chapter of my story of how I became a vampire and of my first kill. While it might, and indeed should, horrify the reader that my first victim was a friend of the mortal I used to be, is my understanding that they are not uncommon first kills. I left the snow-white corpse in the alley and ran to the only place I felt perversely safe, the mausoleum. For the first couple of days of my own death, I starved myself while I considered my fate. I relearned what I was capable of doing, and found that I was stronger, faster, tougher, and more agile than before. I had powers that as a knight I had only seen powerful mages wield. Later, I discovered additional abilities such as a total immunity to disease, helpful when descending on a plague-stricken city like a jackal. I also found my weaknesses. I could no longer stand the light of the sun. Exposure to it for longer than a few seconds burned me terribly. It also pained me to enter temples and other places of worship. The worst effect, of course, had to be my bloodlust. If I did not kill a warm-blooded creature once a night and drink its blood, my hunger would gnaw at me, and any wounds I suffered would not heal no matter how much I rested. Is this the moment for me to admit that there was a time I loved being a blood-sucking creature of the night? It is not impossible to live only at night, merely occasionally inconvenient, and I wouldn't have to kill humans every night, merely warm-blooded creatures. Orcs have a delicious, rich, brothy blood. Rats are a little sweet for the only meal of the night. Werewolves are a real treat, almost decadent to tincture between human and beast, a real gourmet's delight. About a month after I died, I was having the best time of my life. One night, I received a letter from someone who said he was family. Curious, I went to visit him at his tavern, and he was told about a tribe of vampires to which I belonged, the Montalion. In return for performing certain duties for the family, the man at the inn would train me in my vampiric abilities and skills. Though I never got very much detail, I surmise that the two main differences between the different vampire clans is geography and powers. Montalion alone have the gift for teleportation, but the other 8 have powers of their own. My mentor, that's the title he used, would congratulate me after each mission I performed, and came to trust me more and more. If asked, he would tell me about Montalion's newest alliances, who they were manipulating, who they were stalking. It was then I started to become frightened at last. They, and all of their rival clans, were draining the blood of Tamriel itself. I panicked. I had to find a cure. But nowhere could I find any book or rumor suggesting that vampirism is anything but permanent. So I resolved to kill myself. I wanted to bring the Montalion down with me. I joined guilds they opposed, and failed any mission given to me spectacularly. I thought my mentor would turn against me, but he only became quieter, less forthcoming with information, never violent. He was not concerned. He had probably seen vampires like me before. That's why he never attacked me, and mortals can afford to be eternally patient. At last, he refused to give me any further missions. He wouldn't even talk with me, but he never left his tavern. I could come and go, but he'd watch, never talk. That's when I got another letter. There are several of us, you see, former vampires who know what to look for. We're patient too. We learned it in our unlife. We watch and listen and anonymously contact the vampires we know wish to end the curse. Ending the curse is possible, but only just. It is very dangerous, but when you're cursed, the only real danger is no escape. So those were the scariest books I have. There is one more that I can read you that is a little bit scary, but not super. We will start with The Madness of Pelagius by something I can't pronounce, Sosthenes, profiling the renowned Mad Emperor. The man who would be emperor of all Tamriel was born Thuris Pelagius Septim, a prince of the royal family of Wayrest in 3rd Era, 119, at the end of the glorious reign of his uncle, Antiochus I. Wayrest had been showered by much preference during the years before Pelagius's birth, for King Magnus was Antiochus's favorite brother. It is hard to say when Pelagius's madness first manifested itself, for, in truth, the first 10 years of his life were marked by much insanity of the land itself. When Pelagius was just over a year old, Antiochus died, and her daughter, Kintyra, assumed the throne to the acclaim of all. Kintyra II was Pelagius's cousin and an accomplished mystic and sorceress. If she had sufficient means to peer into the future, she would have surely fled the palace. The story of the War of the Red Diamond has been told in many other scholarly journals, but as most historians agree, Kintyra II's reign was usurped by her and Pelagius's cousin Uriel by the power of his mother, Potema, the so-called Wolf Queen of Solitude. The year after her coronation, Kintyra was trapped in Glenpoint and then imprisoned in the imperial dungeons there. All of Tamriel exploded into warfare as Prince Uriel took the throne as Uriel III, and High Rock, because of the imprisoned empress's presence there, was the location of some of the bloodiest battles. Pelagius's father, King Magnus, allied himself with his brother Sepphoris against the usurper emperor, and brought the wrath of Uriel III and Queen Potema down on Wayrest. Pelagius, his brothers and sisters, and his mother, Euthiela, fled to the island of Belfiera. Euthiela was the line of Direni, and her family manse is still located on that ancient isle even to this day. There is, thankfully, much written record of Pelagius's childhood in Belfiera, as recorded by nurses and visitors. All who met him described him as a handsome, personable boy, interested in sport, magic, and music. Even assuming diplomats' lack of candor, Pelagius seemed, if anything, a blessing to the future of the Septim dynasty. When Pelagius was 8, Sepphoris slew Uriel III at the Battle of Ikadag and proclaimed himself Emperor Sepphoris I. For the next 10 years of his reign, Sepphoris battled Potema. Pelagius's first battle was the Siege of Solitude, which ended with Potema's death and the final end of the war. In gratitude, Sepphoris placed Pelagius on the throne of Solitude. As king of Solitude, Pelagius's eccentricities of behavior began to be noticeable. As a favorite nephew of the emperor, few diplomats to the Solitude made critical commentary about Pelagius. For the first 2 years of his reign, Pelagius was at very least noted for his alarming shifts in weight. 4 months after taking the throne, a diplomat from Ebenhard called Pelagius a hale and hearty soul with a heart so big it widens his waist. 5 months after that, the visiting princess of Firsthold wrote to her brother that the kings gripped my hand, and it felt like I was being clutched by a skeleton. Pelagius is greatly emaciated indeed. Sepphoris never married and died childless 3 years after the Siege of Solitude. As the only surviving sibling, Pelagius's father, Magnus, left the throne of Wayrest and took residence at the imperial city as the Emperor Magnus I. Magnus was elderly and Pelagius was his oldest living child, so the attention of Tamriel focused on Sentinel. By this time, Pelagius's eccentricities were becoming infamous. There are many legends about his active as king of Solitude. I want to point out that this actually said Sentinel one sentence before, but both are in error. It should be Solitude. But few well-documented cases exist. It is known that Pelagius locked the young princes and princesses of Silvanar in his room with him, only releasing them when the unsigned declaration of war was slipped under the door. When he tore off his clothes during a speech he was giving at a local festival, his advisors apparently decided to watch him more carefully. On the orders of Magnus, Pelagius was married to the beautiful heiress of an ancient dark elf noble family, Cataria Ryathim. Nordic kings who marry dark elves seldom improve their popularity. There are 2 reasons most scholars give for this union. Magnus was trying to cement relations with Ebenhard, where the Raathim clan hailed. Ebenhard's neighbor, Mournhold, had been a historical ally of the Empire since the very beginning, and the royal consort of Queen Berenziah had won many battles in the War of the Red Diamond. Ebenhard had a poorly kept secret of aiding Uriel III and Potema. The other reason for the marriage was more personal. Cataria was a shrewd diplomat as she was beautiful. If any creature was capable of hiding Pelagius's madness, it was she. On the 8th of Second Seed, 3rd Era 145, Magnus I died quietly in his sleep. Joletha, Pelagius's sister, took over the throne of Solitude, and Pelagius and Cataria rode to the imperial city to be crowned Emperor and Empress of Tamriel. It is said that Pelagius fainted when the crown was placed on his head, but Cataria held him up so only those close to the throne could see what had happened. Like so many Pelagius stories, this cannot be verified. Pelagius III never truly ruled Tamriel. Cataria and the Elder Council made all the decisions and only tried to keep Pelagius from embarrassing all. Still, stories of Pelagius' third reign exist. It is said that when the Argonian ambassador from Blackrose came to court, Pelagius insisted on speaking in all grunts and squeaks, as that was, quote, the Argonians' natural language. It is known that Pelagius was obsessed with cleanliness, and many guests reported waking in the noise of an early morning scrub down of the imperial palace. The legend of Pelagius, while inspecting the servants' works, suddenly defecating on the floor to give them something to do, is probably apocryphal. When Pelagius began actually biting and attacking visitors to the imperial palace, it was decided to send him to a private asylum. Cataria was proclaimed regent 2 years after Pelagius took the throne. For the next 6 years, the emperor stayed in a series of institutions and asylums. Traitors to the empire have many lies to spread about this period. Whispered stories of hideous experiments and tortures performed on Pelagius have almost become accepted as fact. The noble Lady Kataraya became pregnant shortly after the emperor was sent away, and rumors of infidelity and even more absurd conspiracies to keep the sane emperor locked away ran amok. As Kataraya proved, her pregnancy came about after a visit to her husband's cell. With no other evidence, as loyal subjects, we are bound to accept the Empress's word on the matter. Her second child, who would reign for many years as Uriel IV, was the child of her union with her consort Lariat, and publicly acknowledged as such. On a warm night in Sun's dawn in his 34th year, Pelagius III died after a brief fever in his cell at the temple of Kinnereth in the Isle of Bethany. Kataraya I reigned another 46 years before passing the scepter on to her only child she had with Pelagius, Cassander. Pelagius's wild behavior has made him perversely dear to the province of his birth and death. The second of Sun's dawn, which may or may not be the anniversary of his death, records are not very clear, is celebrated as Mad Pelagius, the time when foolishness of all sorts is encouraged. And so, one of the least desirable emperors in the history of the Septine dynasty has become one of the most famous. Yet another tale complete. Let me see what else I can find that isn't. Here we go. The Light and the Dark by Ulrich Untersch. A man describes the light and the dark to his two grandchildren. Yes, children, it is no accident that this land of Tamriel has been called the Arena. Side note, actually it is an accident. Originally they were going to make the game an arena game and they changed their minds, but the packaging was already printed, so they had to stick with arena. So that's a funny little sentence to start it with. Back to the story. The old man altered his position on the large rock that bore his weight and straightened his long gray robe. Rheumy eyes lost their focus as they gazed out over the sun-warmed valley in the mountains of High Rock. For a moment, he saw a vision of ancient horrors instead of the fresh greenery of spring. A chill washed over his aged bones. Is this a suitable topic for the young and innocent? He asked himself. The young must be taught, but must they learn of such things now when they should be playing in the sunlight? This is a tale for the dreary winter, with the wind howling outside a walled town, and the doors and windows closed and bolted against the blast and cold and other things. He glanced with affection at his two grandchildren, the little tow-headed boy with a hint of mischief dancing in his eyes, even on those rare occasions when sitting quietly, and his older sister, a serene lass, the old man thought, her hair like a dark flame, and her slightly pointed ears were the only obvious signs of elven blood. So like her grandmother, the old man thought. The past is past, and Ashira had brought him so much peace and happiness after a lifetime of battle. He forced his thoughts back to the present. Sorry, children, I was remembering things. Old people do that, you know. Are you going to tell us the story of Jaggerthorn and Emperor and the Eternal Champion? His grandson asked. That's my favorite. Not exactly, son. They were a part of it in a way, as are Eric and Morelin and Edward and Raymond and many others. Even the gods play a part. This is a far older story, and even the priests won't tell it my way. They have their own interpretations and their fears as well. I'm too old and have seen too much to have any fear left. Except that our people will forget, and forgetting is dangerous. So I and a few others carry this tale and try to spread it among the younger generations. You aren't really old enough to understand it all, but I can feel that my end is not far off. I must ask you to remember anyway. In a few years, perhaps, if I still live, we can discuss it again. If not, well, you must seek out others who know and compare notes. You talk as if you're going to die, Granther, his granddaughter spoke up. That can't happen. You will live forever. Chuckling. I'm afraid not, dear. But I have a little while left. Enough for the story. The children settled back into the bole of a large oak, knowing that the old man could not be hurried. Leaning forward, he began. Long, long ago, before there were any people at all, even before the gods, Tamriel was chosen as a battleground by two things. It is difficult to find words that fit them well. I call them the light and the dark. Others use other names. Good and evil, bird and serpent, order and chaos. None of these names really apply. It suffices that they were opposites and totally antithetical. Neither is really good or evil as we know the words. They are mortal since they do not really live, but they do exist. Even the gods and their Daedric enemies are pale reflections of the eternal conflict between them. It's as though their struggle creates energies that distort their surroundings, and those energies are so powerful that life can appear, like an eddy in the stream. Do demons and trolls come from the dark, Grandpa? Not exactly, son. The undead evils we know, and the demons that live on in oblivion, tend to align with the dark. Their natures are more akin to it. Humans and the other peoples of Tamriel, even the misunderstood Dark Elves, are more aligned with the light. Our evils are not always of the dark, but some are. And these are the truly dangerous ones. Jagar Tharn was almost wholly aligned with the dark, and that is really why he was so monstrous. It was not because he was a black mage, as some would have it. Did his magic come from the dark, Granther? The girl's interest was piqued by the mention of magic. Her heritage is beginning to show itself, thought the old man. No, magic power comes directly from the energies swirling around both entities. These energies are impersonal and all mixed up. Black magic is more a matter of intent than effect. The Mages Guild holds that a fireball, say, directed against a creature intent on causing harm is not black magic, but the same spell directed at one seeking peace is. In this, they are right. Destruction of a fire daedra strengthens the light and weakens the dark just a little. In the same manner, destruction of a unicorn strengthens the dark. What about the gods? Do they come from the light? The boy's eyes were animated but tinged with apprehension. He adored stories of the gods and goddesses of Tamriel's pantheon and the heroes who served them. The old man chuckled. The gods have an unusual origin if some of the oldest tales are true. The oldest inhabitants of the world, no one seems to be sure what race they were, had a system of myths that they believed in for 1,000 years. The people of Edada believed for so long and so well that their beliefs may, just may, have drawn upon the energies surrounding Tamriel to bring the gods themselves into being. If that is so, the conflict between the light and the dark provided the energy, and the Etadans the structure that created the gods of Tamriel. No one really knows, since it was so long ago and so little survives from that time. It no longer matters. The gods have their own existence now and mostly aligned with the light, except for a few who are, shall we say, a little ambiguous. Why do we have to remember, Granther? What is the danger you spoke of? If the light and dark are so big and powerful, can we influence them? Should we try? What should we fight for? I see that your critical faculties are developing, Solara. That is good. The answer is simple, but quite large enough for mere mortals like us. The light and dark are evenly matched, and perhaps will never resolve their conflict. Mortals and the beings of Aetherius sometimes can perceive traces of them. Therein lies the danger. To most of us, the light is more congenial, even inspiring. It moves us to behavior that we would call good. To creatures like us, the dark is horrible. Those who have seen visions of it are often driven mad, and the ones who are not would be better dead. The dark is to us a monstrous emptiness, an emptiness that sucks the soul toward it, to be twisted, maimed, and ultimately destroyed. What we can see of it seems utterly evil. Perhaps somewhere else this would not be so, but in our world it is. The old man paused to gather his thoughts, gazing once more at the fresh new life of spring. What we must do is never forget that the dark is always there, beckoning to the weak-souled among us. Should it gain ascendancy over Tamriel, through agents perverted by its awful attraction, terrible things could happen. All that we hold beautiful or desirable, even love itself, would be swept away. Peace and hope would be no more. For Tamriel, that would be the worst possible disaster. What I saw during Jagar's reign nearly killed me, almost destroyed my mind. When he was destroyed, I thought the worst was over, but it was not. The forces of the dark are on the march again, and new heroes must rise to join the eternal champion in the fight against them. The old man and the two children sat in silence several minutes. Finally, the children assisted their grandfather to his feet, and they walked slowly away toward home and hearth and lunch. Hello, No Limit. We've got time for some more. Let's see if I can find appropriate ones. We shall do On Lycanthropy. On Lycanthropy by Varnard Caressin studies the nature and habits of lycanthropes. Werewolves. How does one become interested in studying the disease lycanthropy? I've interviewed a number of my peers and discovered that to a man, they have all entered the field after a horrifying encounter with a lycanthrope of some variety. I am no exception. In Skyrim, it is an old tradition to rub canis root on the trees surrounding your house as a ward against werebears. When I was young and stupid, as opposed, I guess, to being old and stupid as I am now, I always hoped to meet a werebear to see if they were as impressive as legends suggested. I would follow strange tracks in the woods until they disappeared, with no fear or even thought about what I would do after I found my quarry. By Thorig's beard, I was lucky that my investigations were fruitless. When I did finally see a lycanthrope, it was not a werebear. It was a werewolf, the common lycanthrope, which can be found in every part of Tamriel. My father was a priest, and during the coldest part of the winter, he allowed the beggars and the riffraff of Falkreath to stay in the relative warmth of his cellar and of his temple. We would even supply warm barley stew. My sisters and brothers and I actually enjoyed this bit of philanthropy, for in the cellars during the winter, it seemed there was a constant party. There were always travelers with interesting stories and eccentricities, and the atmosphere of the cellars was always light and friendly, until that night. By an established tradition, the beggars who were sick or wanted rest, more than food and companionship, would go to the cots at the farthest, darkest end of the cellar, where they could be assured of at least relative quiet. We were enjoying a song. My sister Gethessa was dancing to the amusement of all. The song ended, but a chorus continued from the darkness at the far end of the cellar. A drunk and incomprehensible as most of the carolers were, it took a minute for us to realize that the sound we were hearing was not singing, but screaming. No one was too concerned, for some of the older tramps often suffered from vivid nightmares. Nevertheless, one of the father's priests went to silence the screamer, and the moment he disappeared into the murk, we heard another sound. The snarl of the wolf. Then we heard the priest screaming as the original scream died off. "Werewolf!" cried the old bard who had been leading the song. The cellar exploded into chaos. I was pushed out of the cellar door into the snow with the first wave of panic, but I could see that some more of the brave, or drunk, hobos were rushing into the darkness to do battle with the lycanthrope. They were all, of course, almost instantly killed. My father, upon hearing of his unwelcome visitor, sealed off the cellar after the last survivor of the carnage had left. A seasoned battle mage from the Falkreath Mages Guild, who owed father a favor, went into the cellar and slew the beast. "Not too tough," he said as he emerged, carrying the carcass with him. "Winter must have been tough on him, too." Despite his bold words, the blood on his face and chest did not only come from his foe. Werewolves do not revert to their human form upon death, despite what legends will tell you. I had the opportunity to look at the monster's steaming body out in the snow before it was carried away to be burned. The teeth, clotted with flesh of the beggars, was horrifying, but the claws shocked me even more. I have seen live lycanthropes battle golems, atronachs, and even other beings not harmed by mundane weapons, and concluded that they act as naturally enchanted weapons. Because the werewolf is the most ubiquitous of lycanthropes, the term lycanthropy has been used since ancient days to describe the disease that transforms men into half-beasts, although lycanthrope only strictly should refer to men who change into werewolves. but that is semantics. There are certainly differences between the 7 documented forms of lycanthropy in Tamriel, but more similarities. In Black Marsh and southern Morrowind, were crocodiles stalk the swamps. Black Marsh also shares with the Imperial Province and the wetter parts of Elsewhere the vile presence of were-lions. Valenwood's were-vultures were not found in any other province. The were-boar has found both the climates of High Rock and Hammerfell amenable. As I mentioned before, the were-bear is the most common lycanthrope in Skyrim and is also found in the northern parts of High Rock, the Imperial Province, and Morrowind. The werewolf can be found in every province. The 7th lycanthrope, which I have never seen but my trusted peers have assured me exists, is a were-shark that roams the oceans around Tamriel. I have spent my life categorizing and observing lycanthropes, but I sometimes feel that I am still a child trapped in the cellar in my attempts to understand them. I know, for example, that lycanthropy can be cured shortly after infection, but after that time the victim is doomed. No one of my acquaintances has cured themselves after undergoing the first transformation. On the other hand, I have a colleague investigating a coven of witches in the Glenpoint foothills of High Rock who are rumored to have a cure. I remain dubious. Perhaps it is because they are doomed that makes lycanthropes so aggressive. I have removed the contents of a werewolf's stomach and found more remnants of roots and berries than animal flesh. My conclusion is they do not need to attack and devour humans to survive, but for some reason they do. Does lycanthropy drive them mad, or do lycanthropes feel the need to spread the disease as a form of procreation? I do not know. I am not certain that any of us who are not lycanthropes ourselves will ever know. And then, of course, it's too late. So here we are. We've got a little more time before my witchy self needs to run away. Oh, somebody ran to my fire. I don't understand why people do that. Let me see. Here we go. Greywash by Tudasis, an overview of the Greywash play, which portrays the creation of harpies. On the 12th of Hearthfire every year, the people of Hammerfell Township and Barony of Laneland celebrate Riglametha. Riglametha in the Banthan dialect of the ancient Regard tongue means grateful offering and is a festival of the graces the gods have granted the people of Laneland over the centuries. Tradition dictates the performance of a number of plays about the great moments from Laneland's past, and one of the most popular is Greywash, which may be translated as the crows who were punished or the crows who punish. Old Redguard is somewhat vague with its objective case. The story of Greywash, as any Laneland child will tell you, is of the wicked sisterhood of Daedra worshippers who craft lies, curses, murders, and suicides to hurt the people of Laneland. Most of all, they use their beauty as a weapon to drive men to mayhem. Their leader, the temptress Noctura, seduces the unnamed Baron of Laneland and is about to force him to commit suicide to prove his love when the Baroness arrives. The Baroness tricks Noctura into wearing a beautiful white robe from the Baroness's closet. See how the robe glows with the luminescence of a pearl, but the inside is soft, feathered with down. Noctura puts on the robe and the trap is sprung. The robe is magical and transforms Noctura into a giant black bird. The Baron, no longer enchanted, slays the great bird and calls in his cook. The Sisterhood has, by this time, taken over Laneland Castle and turned it into an orgy-filled den of decadence. At the height of their frenzied debauch, the cook arrives with an enormous roast to keep their energy high. They dig in the deliciously prepared meal, and at the crescendo of their gorging, the Baron and Baroness appear to tell them that they have just devoured their leader Noctura. The women scream and caw, and suddenly they too are transformed by the magic of the robe into harpies, vicious half-bird creatures. The interesting thing about Greywash, from a scholarly perspective, is how much the story has changed and continues to change over the years. In some versions of the story, Noctura is an innocent Excuse me, Noctira is an innocent peasant seamstress, and it is the Baroness who is the cruel and wicked leader of the Harpies. Noctira prays to Dibella and is given the charm to make the magical robe, and she and the Baron live happily ever after once the Harpies have feasted on the transformed Baroness. During the long reign of the Virgin Baroness of Laneland, Viana the Pure, the Baron was portrayed as a willing conspirator of Noctira. The Harpies thus had two birds to dine on. It is unlikely that trying to find the truth in the story is profitable research. Harpies are indeed a common nuisance in the Iliac Bay, particularly around Laneland. They do have their own tongue, and the few who have mastered it have not been devoured by their interviewees, suggests that the Harpies have no more idea about their origins than we do. In a different vein, one of the best known of the Daedra princes is named Nocturnal, who is often portrayed as a beautiful dark woman holding two black crows. It is not a difficult etymological trick to derive the name Noctira from nocturnal, or vice versa, which is an interesting take on it. Woo! I might have one small one left. If I do not, we will call it, but let's see if there is another one. Small. Small. Give me a small moment. Here's one. This will be the one we end on. The Story of Lyrisias by Bresney Smith. Epic tale of Lyrisias and the worm of Akavir. In ancient times, there lived a hero named Lyrisias. He fought against the Akaviri slave traders and single-handedly slew hundreds. Despite his valor, Lyrisias' army was routed and scattered to the four winds. Lyrisias fled to the moors to escape the Akaviri chariots. Far from the land of men, Lyrisias entered the blasted lands. At the heart of this forsaken landscape, he met a worm. The great scaly beast mocked the mighty blow of Lyrisias. I'm just going to say Lyr's enchanted spear. It melted the shield fear-struck, gift from the Daedra Boethia, with a single blast of its fiery breath. Lyr, seeing that he could not defeat the creature by force of arms, surrendered. The worm intended to devour Lyr when the hero offered to be its slave and manservant. Ever prideful, the worm agreed. Seeing that the worm was vulnerable to conceit, Lyr spoke. "O great worm, for my first service, I beg that you allow me to polish your one tarnished scale." Indeed, centered between the great wings of the creature was a dull scale, clearly out of reach of its long neck. Its vanity was such that it immediately lowered one ring for Lyr to climb upon. Once astride the great lizard, Lyr slid his dagger underneath the scale and into the tender flesh of the beast. Though it spun and twisted in all directions, the worm could not get at the hero. Finally, it took to the air. Lyr clung to the neck with all his strength as the worm banked, rolled, and dove. Seeing that Lyr could not be shaken free, the worm demanded that he remove the stinging blade. Lyr answered, "Fly straight on until you see a great army. Destroy that army, and I will remove my blade." With a great roar, the scaled creature set off. The Akaviri army had no chance against the fire-breathing beast. They have never played Tamriel since. "I has done as you bid, now sheath your stinger," roared the worm. Knowing that he would be devoured or worse, Lyr pulled the blade and then leapt back of the flying worm. Indeed, the foul monster had intended to slay the hero. The worm pursued the plummeting Lear. Boethia appeared beside the falling hero. Praising him for ultimately destroying the army of Akavir, she turned him into a raven. Lear quickly lost the worm in the clouds. Legend has it that the worm still lives, though this happened in the first era, long, long ago. The dragon nurses a grudge against Lear and all of his kind. It has vowed never again to trust two-legged bearers of weapons. Scholars note, if this legend has a basis in fact, the artifact Fearstruck was utterly destroyed. No other reference to it has ever been found. And I believe that is our session this evening. So next time I probably won't be witchy like this, and I will do voices again. But I hope you enjoyed, for our first day of Witches Festival, having some scary stories. And I hope to see you again soon. Have a great evening.